Did you ask permission, Michelle?
I thought I did.
It's all good. You're gonna set the sub-regional picture.
I've got Michelle lined up, followed by Jim and Donna in the corner. So you're all taking the hit here.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. So Donna will come in as well sometime during the presentation. And yeah, Jim will talk about together with Donna, the Enabling Housing Supply Act, and then James and Jim will come back on RMA reform at the end. So what I'm going to do now is just provide you with an update on Future Proof as a whole, including some of the other work stream. Now, the presentation which James and I did earlier relates to the transport work stream, so that's already covered. But I'm just going to share my screen with you. Just give me a minute. All right, can you all see that?
Sure can.
All right, I'll go through this quite quickly. And again, maybe we'll take questions and comments at the end. And also, Keith Martin is on the line with us. So Keith has been involved in the Three Waters work as well. So he'll also be here to answer any question when it comes to the Three Waters work stream.
So just before we kick off, Michelle, so everybody should have this in their workshop file. All right? Okay, sorry, Michelle, just making sure everybody knew they had it.
Sure. The purpose of this workshop is really to bring elected members and our Mangamari representatives just to an update on the Future Proof strategy as a whole, and also just a reminder on the purpose and importance of Future Proof to the sub-region. What I'll do as well is provide you with an update on the timelines that we're working to, which I alluded to briefly earlier on. But Donna will talk about the out-of-sequence developments, some of the submissions we've received that would need to be considered by the hearing panel. So she'll come in for that. And then I'll take you through very briefly, providing you with an update on the priority development areas, Three Waters work stream, which has been undertaken as part of this work. A quick reminder, look, this is the Future Proof sub-region. You all know this. It includes ourselves, our district, Hamilton City, and Waipa district. Obviously, for the Hamilton to Auckland corridor matters, it extends into Auckland as far as Papakura, and also extends to Matamata, Piako, Morrinsville in particular. Just with regards to the role of Future Proof, at a very high level, the key architectural framework, so to speak, for Future Proof is reflected in this pink box here with regards to the key pieces of legislation and policy directives that frames the strategy. The RMA is obviously key, the LGA, the Land Transport Management Act, vision and strategy for the Wakato River, treaty settlements and co-governance arrangements, GPS for transport, and various national policy statements, as well as iwi management plans. So all of that forms the architectural framework for the strategy. And on the left-hand side in the green are some of the key work streams that are underway at the moment to support, or really which underpins the strategy. The sub-regional Three Waters study, and I've got a slide on this later on, is key to this, as well as the business cases being undertaken for the Northern Hamilton and Southern Hamilton wastewater treatment plants. So that's a key work stream that's underway. The Hamilton-Auckland corridor work, obviously, which is now being integrated into Future Proof and the Metro Spatial Plan. And related to that, obviously, was the transport program business case, which we did earlier on. And then the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, Wakato 2070 and Waipa 2050 are all growth strategies that have informed the Future Proof strategy as well. And then in the yellow box are the key implementation mechanisms. Obviously, the RPS, the Regional Policy Statement, regional and district plans, the regional land transport plans, LTPs, as well as more detailed business cases that are being developed or will be developed as we progress a number of the future-proof work streams. Just with regards to the overview of the strategy itself, it's of course a 30-year growth management and implementation plan for the sub-region to essentially help guide decision-making on sub-regional issues such as on growth matters, housing, transport, water, and the environment. The original strategy was launched in 2009 by King Tūheitia and the then Prime Minister John Key. And in 2019, the partnership was relaunched to include central government and Auckland Council, as well as Auckland iwi, into the Future-Proof Implementation Committee. And that essentially became the first Crown iwi Council Urban Growth Partnership in the country. As we indicated in the earlier presentation, the strategy was notified in October last year, and we received 54 submissions, and hearings were held in December. A number of workshops are being held over the next 3 months by the hearing panel. Deliberations will happen in June, and we expect the future-proof governing body to consider the strategy for approval in June this year. With regards to the submissions themselves, the largest portion of submission points related to out-of-sequence developments. These are essentially seeking additional land to be included in the urban and village enablement areas, which Donna will talk about shortly, or a change in the timing for these proposed developments. I guess significantly 20 submissions which were seeking out of sequence or unanticipated development as part of the submissions, and a number of these were around the Hamilton City fringe. So with that, I'm just going to hand over to Donna to take you through these emerging areas which came out of some of these submissions. Donna? Are you there, Donna?
Good afternoon, councillors and Whangai Māori representatives. So on the slide you can see in front of you, these are the out of sequence or unanticipated development areas around the Hamilton City Council boundary. So you can see some areas in yellow. Those are agreed areas where we already have agreements between council partners for future expansion or boundary adjustments. And then the areas in orange are submissions that we received on the future-proof strategy. Some of them overlap with submissions that we received on our proposed district plan. So we do have a decision released on some of these areas. So there's R3, it's just an arbitrary number at this point in time, so I wouldn't read anything into the fact that it's got R3 there, but that's an area on the eastern side of the Waikato Expressway. There's the Ruakura development. So we've received a submission for the Ruakura Inland Port area. There are some submissions further south, so they're within the Waipa boundary around Southern Links in the south of the city. And then on the western side, we've got 3 submissions within Waikato District Council's boundary. One is on WA, so that's our already agreed land transfer area with Hamilton City. There's an area around State Highway 23 and Bryma Road, and then further north an area adjacent to our boundary with the city on State Highway 39A heading towards Te Kōwhai. So these will all be discussed by the deliberations. panel at the Future Proof deliberations coming up. But we can see that there's a lot of interest in changing land use around Hamilton City. So it's hot topic, and it'll be up to the Future Proof deliberations panel to decide if any of those areas have any merit towards them. And on the next slide, we have some further out of sequence development areas beyond the city boundary in our district. If I start in the north, there's a submitter in Tuakau. They also submitted on our proposed district plan, so we have a decision for that area. It's important to note that while the strategy was open for consultation and submissions, the decision on our district plan wasn't yet released. So some submitters wanted to submit on both to make sure that their voice was heard. Since the strategy was developed, we do now have that decision on our proposed district plan, which might help inform the panel in their decisions. We've got an area in Te Kaupata, an area in Taupiri, Tiuku, north of Ngarawahia, 2 submissions relating to Ohiniwai, and then a submission in Horatu. The submission in Horatu actually, the submitter's area is already included in the intended urban area boundary. And so it really is a site-specific zoning that the submitter is seeking, and that's sort of beyond the scope of the Future Proof strategy. The Future Proof strategy doesn't identify site-specific zoning. The strategy just has intended urban area boundaries. And these boundaries that have been put forward in the strategy relate to our Waikato 2070 growth strategy, as well as our proposed district plan. So the boundaries that we've put into the strategy make sure that we include all of our future areas for development. So these submitters are generally seeking for a change in land use pattern outside of those areas, or to change the timing of the areas and when they can be developed.
Thank you, Donna. I'm just
Can I just before we go on, Michelle, I just want to ask, I don't want to open up the question, I just want to ask one question, and Donna briefly touched on in relation to Tuakau. How many of these others that came through the Future Proof hearing actually did submit to the district plan, other than Tuakau?
Other than Tuakau, there are 5 that also submitted on our proposed district plan. So our submitter that we've got in Taupiri, Tiuku, and our 2 submitters in Ohiniwai. And so there are actually only 3 submitters seeking a change in the Future Proof strategy that did not submit on our proposed district plan.
Right, that's all I needed to know. Thanks.
Thanks, Donna. So just moving on to priority development areas. So these are really areas which have been identified in the sub-region, where we have central government as a key partner to facilitate growth and development in them. I'm not going to go through each one of them in detail, but you can read through it there. The significant ones for us, obviously, Huntly, Rahu, Pukeka, and environs, which also includes Ohiniwai and Te Kaupata. So, so Donna, Jim, and myself are part of this, but it's essentially led by Kāinga Ora as the program lead, looking at the facilitation of social and also affordable housing in the Huntly, Rahu, Pukeka, and environs area. So this is work which has recently started, and we've also got Kāinga Ora who'll be helping us with some urban design work for Huntly over the next few months. So it's good to have government involved in this and being a key partner. And other key partners in this includes Kiwi Rail, obviously local mana whenua are central to this as well. and also Ministry for Housing and Urban Development, amongst others. And then the other key one in our district, which Jim and Donna are both part of, as the Taupori Hopu Hopu Ngaruawahia area or corridor, which feeds into the wider future-proof corridor thinking as well. And then we're also involved in the Ruakura one, as Donna pointed out earlier. An out of sequence area is the Ruakura East area. So we are involved in that. And by the way, I'm not part of Waipa district, I'm part of Wakato district. So that's an area on the slide. We've covered the transport work earlier, so I'm not going to go through this again, but you know, there's significant work happening in that space. I guess the key message again is the link between the transport thinking as well as a future-proof land use strategy thinking as well. So that's going to be critical, but also a significant project which also underpins the future-proof strategy work is the Three Waters work. So, so myself and Keith Martin and Zinab have been part of this work, and Keith is online as well. So the key sub-projects that's underpinning this work include the Hamilton Waikato Metropolitan Southern Wastewater Business Case, the Northern Wastewater Business Case, and the Sub-Regional Three Waters Study. I'll go through some of these in more detail shortly, but the important point to note is that all of these projects are being conducted with Te Ture Whaimana, i.e. the best for river outcome in mind. In other words, to give effect to the vision and strategy for the Waikato River. Significant, obviously, is that this will have implications for cross-boundary infrastructure planning and investment, especially with regards to supporting and unlocking residential, commercial, and industrial growth in the sub-region. Key would be how can we deliver greatest value for money through efficient and sustainable three water systems, and also built into this is integrated approaches to water, energy, and carbon management. And significantly, as we discussed in the transport program business case, we will need to start looking at alternative funding and financing options, because we can't get ratepayers to fund some of these significant intergenerational investment that's required to address three waters issues in the sub-region. Just with regards to the sub-regional three waters study, the catchment area for that is essentially the Waikato River catchment, which is the green area shown on the map. And then the Northern Hamilton Metro Wastewater Detailed Business Case essentially covers the area to the north of Hamilton and includes Taupori, Ngaruawahia, Horatu, Tukawhai, and the rest of Hamilton, which and obviously the key wastewater treatment plants there at this stage is Puketi, Ngaruawahia, and Tukawhai. And then the Southern Hamilton Wastewater DBC essentially includes the entire Southern Hamilton area, which also includes Peacocks, but it goes as far as Te Awamutu and Cambridge, and also includes Tōwhare, Pa, and Matangi as well. Just starting off with the Southern Wastewater business case. Now, just to give you a bit of context here. So this is Southern Hamilton on the map, and the yellow bit there is Peacocks. And the green is Cambridge, and the purple is Te Awamutu, and we've got Tōwhare, Pa over here and Matangi over here. So this business case has been completed and is currently undergoing peer review prior to it being received by the governance group later in the month, in March. The preferred option here, you will be familiar with this from previous engagements that have been held with you, involves a standalone wastewater treatment plant at Cambridge, which will be fully funded by the Waipa District Council, and a new wastewater treatment plant in the southern area around the airport area, which will be a partnership funding solution. So we've got we've got about $4 million in the long-term plan, which is unallocated at this stage, but we've set aside that to help with this work. The vast majority of the funding will have to come from Hamilton City Council. I guess the key implication for the new Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant for us is that areas like Matangi and Tamahiri will be serviced or could be serviced through the standalone, could be serviced by this plant after 2051. In the interim, there will continue to be serviced through standalone plants, but after 2051, the flows can be conveyed to the new Southern Wastewater Treatment Plant. Also, I should mention that a memorandum of understanding have been developed by the program partners to look at funding and financing arrangements for this new wastewater treatment plant, which will inform subsequent long-term plans. And then moving on to the north, the Northern Wastewater business case. This is really leveraging the methodology used in the Southern wastewater business case so that we're achieving efficiencies and applying some of the lessons learned from that work. I'm getting a bit of feedback, Mayor Allen. I think somebody's got their mics on.
Yeah, look, can I ask everyone to turn their mics off? Sounds like a bunch of dogs. Somebody arriving home. Maybe I'll send animal control around, eh?
Thank you. So as I said, the Northern Wastewater business case is just essentially using some of the lessons learned and some of the technical inputs from the South. A multi-criteria assessment, the MCA, is currently underway to inform the preferred option for the North. Some of the options being considered are option A, essentially taking all of our northern Hamilton areas to the north of Hamilton, i.e. Topri, Ngaruaiha, Hopu Hopu, Horatu, and Turkofai to the Puketi wastewater treatment plant. So that's one option. Then we have option 1B, which includes a combination of Puketi and Ngaruaiha wastewater treatment plant. This option would see Turkofai, Horatu, and Topri conveyed to Ngaruaiha, whilst the rest of Hamilton goes to Puketi. And option B2 includes, again, a combination of Puketi and Ngaruaiha, but the key difference here is that Turkofai and Horatu will be conveyed to Puketi in Hamilton, and Topri and Hopu Hopu will be conveyed to the Ngaruaiha wastewater treatment plant. And then a third option would be a do minimum, which essentially is no change to the existing conveyance arrangements that we have. So as I said, these options are being used to inform the multi-criteria assessment. So that's currently underway. Just with regards to the sub-regional 3 water study, which is the Wakato River catchment study. So as I said, this is a whole of catchment approach, which will help to really define intergenerational 3 waters investment decisions in the short, medium, and long term. It will be a catalyst for a paradigm shift for the way 3 waters is managed in the Waikato River catchment and New Zealand, and also being an exemplar of collaboration and delivering a strategy that is supported by all program partners, including Mana Whenua and Tangata Whenua. And of course, it does support the key delivery of the growth management objectives in the Hamilton Auckland Corridor Plan as well. Just with regards to the sub-regional 3 water study, so currently we're in phase 2 of the project. Phase 1 was completed in 2019, which involved the strategic case as well as detailed technical reports. So that has been done. So we're currently doing a technical study of options for achieving objectives for 3 waters, and then the development of the intergenerational investment for 3 waters. Phase 3 will follow next year, which will include identification of candidate projects, prioritization, as well as development of more detailed business cases, and as well as looking funding funding solutions. So this is a more detailed breakdown of phase 2 of the sub-regional work. So looking at the phase 2B, which we're currently in at the moment, which is really looking at the recommendation of intervention setting out delivery for intergenerational three waters infrastructure in the sub-region. So this work, phase 2A, is further broken down into a number of mini projects, if you like. So there are a number of technical reports that are being undertaken to provide the evidence base necessary to move towards a full program development. And these relate to urban stormwater management, blue-green corridor and ecology, environmental credit market trading, policy and consenting, Motoranga Maori, water and wastewater. And in order to showcase some of the best practice applications from this work, a number of case studies have been determined, and these are focusing on Te Kaupata, which is really looking at greenfield growth in Te Kaupata, i.e. through developments like lakeside development, as well as land that we've zoned already in our district plan for residential development, as well as Te Rapa North and the Horotu industrial area, because that's an industrial area, and then Endley and Fairfield, where Kaingaora has significant housing investments in that Hamilton area. So we're really covering a wide spectrum of areas, which includes greenfield, industrial, as well as brownfield residential through this work. And the key reason for this is that from these case studies, we can start applying it to other parts of the sub-region as well. So, May Ellen, that's a quick overview of the Three Waters work and the future-proof strategy as a whole. I'm just going to ask Keith Martin, if he's still online, if you'd like to say anything regarding the Three Waters work, Keith.
Thanks, Michelle. No, I've got nothing else further to add, I guess, other than here to answer any uncertainties that the Mayor or Mayor Allen or the councillors may have. But no, your coverage has been very thorough.
Over to you, Mayor Allen.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Michelle. Right, who's next? Jim. Oh, hang on, Councillor Beck.
Yeah, just a quick question, and make sure I understood you correctly, Michelle. So in regards to the existing scheme, well, sorry, let me rephrase that. In regards to the communities in the south, which will in 2051 have the potential to connect to a new southern plant, you said that they will continue to be serviced by existing plants. Does that mean that, well, two questions really. Does that mean that where there is not currently a plant, one won't be introduced, a separate standalone for that 30-year intervening period? That's the first question. And the second question is that some of those that are already there, Matangi and Taufree in particular, I'm thinking about, are actually struggling currently to be compliant and cope with the volume, and certainly wouldn't permit for further intensification of or increased density of housing or anything like that. They're sort of struggling to meet demand now. Any comments on those two?
Yeah, and Gavin, you may want to come in here as well. So and also Keith. So I understand that in our long-term plan we have some funding for the upgrade of those treatment plants in Matangi and Taufree. So that will obviously happen. However, in the long run, 2051 onwards, yes. So we will look at reconveyancing some of the wastewater from those areas, including the Tamahiri business hub area, to the new treatment plant. But yeah, and also just to reconfirm, Councillor Beck, so we're only looking at one new standalone treatment plant in that airport area, not two. The other one is an upgrade to the existing Cambridge wastewater treatment plant, which is a WIPA district funded project. Gavin, do you want to add anything to this?
No, you're right, Michelle. So I'm trying to remember, I think it's it's either, I think it's Martini's first, so I think that's within the next couple of years, and then Telfori Pa is not far behind that, and needing to be looked at and upgraded as well. That has been factored into all the calculations and all the information that's been prepared around the southern plant. So, yeah.
Interesting to see how this plays out with the next paper. We're going to talk about the 3x3 RMA enablement type thing, because that'll absolutely slam already, stretched infrastructure in those windies in particular.
Yeah, look, I've been on the Three Waters working group with this, and one of the things I strongly pushed was I don't want us to be spending copious amounts of money propping up existing systems, and the classic one for me was Ngaruawahia. If we're going to keep it, we keep it and spend some money on upgrading it as required. But if we've got money in the LTP for a consent renewal and upgrades, why not use that money to push more to ourselves into Hamilton and into Puketi? So there's all those sorts of things in play at the moment. Is what's the best option? Do we stay here and battle it out on our own, or do we actually connect up and get some rationalisation in some of these plants? And that would be the logical one.
I should have also mentioned, Mayor Allen, that the funding implications of those options haven't been done yet, especially for the northern DBC. So those will be undertaken. So that's going to be a key determinant as well in terms of how we go.
Yeah, it's got to be affordable at the end of the day. There's no point in just doing it for the sake of you think it's the right thing to do, but by the way, it's going to cost you an additional $100 million or something. All right, who's next?
I am, and I'm happy to share screen if that's all right, Mayor Allen.
Oh, good, go for it, Jim.
Okay, let's see how this goes. And, okay, so are you able to see the full slide there?
Yeah, can't see it.
Right.
Thanks.
I'll just make sure I can control it. Well, good afternoon, Mayor and councillors. Mrs. Moana Tufungai. 6 months ago, probably we would have planned to be giving an update just on the resource management reform project by central government, which in itself is a huge thing. And then something happened fairly quickly, which we're only bringing you up to speed on now. So apologies, but it has moved quite quickly. This is the Housing Enablement Act with its longer official title there. It was a bill for a little while, but not very long before it became an act. So they released this bill in mid-October. We had the opportunity to make a submission. We did make a firm submission on it. We are going to take that back retrospectively to at the next policy and regulatory meeting, so it's on the record. But we had the opportunity, and the deputy mayor spoke to the select committee around that. We had very similar concerns to future-proof and some of our future-proof partners around lack of consultation, essentially the crux of the bill, which is allowing up to 3 stories times 3 lots per existing lot, so potentially 9 housing units where you currently have 1, which would be allowed across all residential zones. And at the time, we thought that was in the metro parts of our district. We knew that being part of the Hamilton metro area, we thought, gosh, this could potentially change the face of Ngaruawahia, for example. But stay tuned. The next slide. And as we were just talking about, or as you were just talking about in the context of Three Waters, the infrastructure constraints and what that means for the achievability of this sort of density, not to mention Dituri Faimana, which is the vision and strategy for the Waikato River, all of the things we're trying to do to promote good urban design, support our town centers, et cetera. Be that as it may, the bill passed into law 20th of December. And in doing so, it reaffirmed that it applies to Tier 1 councils, including us, as part of the Hamilton metro area, to give effect to the new act by August of essentially this year now, which is 6 months from now. And I suppose some gains, one gain anyway, was while certain matters of national importance were already in the RMA, there's now explicit mention of Te Ture Whaimana o Te Awa o Waikato as a qualifying matter, which could potentially reduce the extent of this intensified area. I suppose, unfortunately, in the sense that it was contrary to our submission, the government has since clarified in the final act that this applies in all towns greater than 5,000 people throughout our district, so not just in the Hamilton metro area. So based on that, would include Pocono, Tuakau, Tekofata, Raglan, and Narawahia. So what does it require?
And Huntley.
Oh, sorry, and Huntley. Sorry, I missed that one. I'd type that in there right now if I could. Sorry. So yeah, Huntley, good point, Donna. So to achieve this by August 2022, all these councils listed have to notify an intensification planning instrument, or an IPI plan change, and that must include the introduction of medium density residential standards for all those towns just mentioned. And as I'll talk about in a minute, that is similar to our medium density housing zone through our proposed district plan decisions, but not the same. So what is MDRS? Well, when I first Googled it, I got this, which is the Mars Desert Research Station. So that's interesting, I thought. I kept looking, and this was more what we're talking about. So in fact, probably given 3 by 3, we'd be looking more than 2 of these 3-story units on a site, although I don't know if they could do that on that particular site. So that's more what we're talking about. And then also here, the within the context of existing single-family residential neighborhoods. So this is not, the act is not saying, please allow for this to happen within your town center or medium density zones. It's saying, really, this should be allowed in any residential area. So I'm guessing this might be Auckland, I'm not sure, but there's a development which looks to be 3 or 4 stories maybe in a single family area. So as I mentioned, up to 3 residential buildings, up to 3 stories each as of right. There are standards. Everything that's permitted has permitted activity standards in a district plan, but the standards don't quite marry up with the standards in our PDP. We have, just setting aside the issue of how big the medium density housing zone is, just looking at those standards, broadly similar height limits and number of units per site. I think it's 8 or 9 meters. I'm not sure if we got that right now, but yeah, up to 3 stories each. Quite different bulk and location standards, things like setbacks, amount of impervious surfaces, et cetera. Generally, the government's act is more permissive than our medium density residential zone, insofar as it's landed in the P decisions. So I guess then when you look at where it would apply, then you get a very different picture in the new act, which is that even assuming that we as a council or our communities are okay with medium density housing subject to the government's new standards, this would apply in all those residential zones in all those towns we talked about, versus our current focus in the PDP decisions, which is to focus those medium density residential zones in and around our town centers, largely the same towns, but this would be from boundary to boundary of our urban areas rather than just within walking distance or the town centers. Big change. So who decides? Well, I should say it is already clear to a degree. The government's already decided a lot of this. However, there is room for flexibility around things like qualifying matters, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in terms of the process, we must use a streamlined planning process for intensification, the ISPP. We do have to consult using the same process of submissions and further submissions. The panel is required to be independent hearing commissioners, to have hearings, make recommendations. Then it gets a little bit different, where council, it's not finally up to council. Council can agree to the hearing panel's recommendations, in which case it can be adopted, or if it disagrees with the recommendations, then the Minister for the Environment can make the final, would make the final decision. And also the big difference is no appeal rights other than on points of law, which would be a judicial review. So no arguing the toss with the environmental court. So this does signal the government's strong intent here, and it does, I suppose, raise the question when we do go to consultation or pre-consultation, really what we have to work with in terms of the discussion with our communities. So is there any flexibility? What flexibility do we have? In the Act, the qualifying matters are listed there, and you would have possibly seen this slide already, but I've just highlighted in particular the consideration of Te Ture Whaimana, which we and our other Hamilton metro area councils are looking very closely at in terms of working with Waikato Tainui and the Waikato River Authority in terms of what this might mean and what this might mean for intensification and where it is and isn't appropriate. And then, of course, there's a catch-all towards the end around any other matter that makes high density inappropriate. And I suppose we could make that list quite long if we look at things like character, et cetera. But just going back up to the top point, matters of national importance already do include historic heritage, natural hazards, significant indigenous vegetation. So there are things that have recently come through our proposed district plan decisions, which give us some things to work with. We'll do the work based on this workshop and the feedback we get. We can do work and come back to you with more detail on that. So there are some levers that we could use to potentially say in Waikato District, in those towns, we recommend instead that it exclude certain parts of those towns based on some of these qualifying matters. Beautiful, Ala. So how could we consider these? So what does that look like to consider them? Well, I suppose there's technical work that could be done, and I suppose the technical discussions that are already happening are among partner councils. So we could jointly procure some work rather than having it done independently and separately for Hamilton, Waipa, and ourselves. Similarly, talking to Waikato Tainui and the River Authority, something that makes sense to do regarding Te Ture Whaimana, again, in a joined up manner with our neighboring councils would make sense. Similarly, a potential joint hearing panel. We could have one commissioner or maybe the entire panel that would be similar across the three councils in our area. They could look at our plan changes, even though our plan changes would probably be quite different, just having that continuity around the topics. And then there's general information sharing that we're already doing. Donna and James and others in the team are already taking part in a variety of online chats sort of on a weekly basis with the Tier 1 councils around New Zealand, as well as the more local ones, and trying to get answers on some of these questions around what other leverage could we have, what other matter could be a qualifying matter. And fair to say, unless I've missed something recently, fair to say Ministry for the Environment officials have been, I suppose, not able to answer these questions with any confidence or clarity, really. They're trying to interpret the legislation along with us and asking us what we think. But I guess the good news there is we haven't heard a whole lot of, oh, no, it doesn't mean that. We generally, what we're hearing is, well, it's, if you think, maybe have a think about that. So, so these are some of these other matters we're considering. I know that, for example, Christchurch is looking at their tree cover being the Garden City, looking at whether, even though it's not significant indigenous vegetation, whether their urban vegetation, their general tree cover could be something that they try to protect in implementing this act. Availability of infrastructure, including public transport, how much to centers or proximity to community facilities and commercial facilities, how much can that factor into it? Can you have unsupported residential growth where people do have to hop in a car and drive everywhere that they need to go? So those are some of the matters that we as officers have thought about. Keen to get some feedback on that in a minute. Just a few more slides for me. I think it's just important to point out that we're in a relatively unique position as a council with our decisions being released in full just last month, and appeals still to close now. So appeals will have closed before August. Of course, they close tomorrow, but in all likelihood, we'll still be working through appeals in August. So there's one complicating factor already. We're not likely to have a fully operative plan by August. So then a question in implementing this is, are we looking at a partially operative plan, and which parts in relation to intensification, are they operative or not? And there's only a few other councils in New Zealand that are in a similar situation, with New Plymouth, for example, about to release its decisions, at least later this year. So they'll be in a similar situation with appeals, et cetera. So it is enough to make your head hurt. It's very complicated. So just some of the technicalities, and we don't have to decide this today, but just the way the RMA works, you may recall that a plan change can only be done to an operative plan or part of a plan that's operative. So if we had sort of everything to do with residential intensification that had no appeals on it, or we had appeals but they were quickly resolved, we could potentially make those parts, the council could make those parts operative, and then we could build a plan change on that. The advantage that has, is that the proposed district plan does those provisions, people can start using them. They basically become the new operative plan before the intensification layer comes on. They can start using their new rezoning or even our current medium density zones. A variation is the option when you haven't resolved or made operative any part of the plan in relation to the topic. So it's apparently possible, but not typically done after decisions because of those complications with appeals, et cetera. And again, it does put the affected part of the plan on hold rather than allowing it to become operative. So looking at land supply, the release of the new land supply could be slowed if we did a variation on something that wasn't, that we hadn't made operative yet. There's also the appeals process. It's possible we could get an appeal or more than one appeal dealing with this issue. They might say, hey, we like the new Government Act, and we'd like you to just incorporate that now rather than waiting till August. So that's a possible channel as well, but probably not going to resolve the issue of where geographically and spatially this all applies. I don't think that if we got an appeal saying, please extend your medium density housing zone to the whole of Huntly, Raglan, Ngāruawāhia, et cetera, I'm not sure that's the sort of thing we could just agree with an appellant or even disagree with an appellant without taking it to through the public consultation process. So there are possible combinations of the above. We could potentially get an appeal that allows us to tweak our standards, what applies in the zone. But again, that whole spatial and geographic extent probably needs further public engagement through either a plan change or a variation. And in light of all this and all these complications, there is an option. There's always an option of writing to the minister and asking for a time extension. And different people have different views as to whether, how that might be received. But we are definitely in a very small minority of councils that's in this particular situation. Although I think all councils might like a bit more time than August. So I think this is my final slide before questions is what we were thinking about as potential next steps is continuing to work with our future-proof partners, having these discussions and combining resources, coming to our council's policy and regulatory committee, probably in March, to talk about and potentially confirm a hearing panel that might work across the future-proof partners and as well as our JMA partners. There are legal issues where we're probably as planners, we won't be able to answer the questions ourselves without getting some legal advice. Obviously, we've got appeals closing tomorrow. We'll look at what's there in relation to medium density residential housing, and that can inform the options we bring back to you next time. That possible extension to the minister, and then, like I just mentioned, a report to the March PNR committee might be a good way to formalize the feedback that we get from you today, get some formal approval of the way forward and possible timeframes between now and August, as well as possibly that hearing panel. And I think that's that is it in terms of my slides. I could leave the slides up in case you want me to go back to any of them, or I can take them down. I hope my mic was on and you heard what I said.
Yeah, Alan, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know I'm on mute. Yeah, you can take the mickey out of me now. Hey, thanks for that, Jim. Take your screen down if you don't mind. I put myself on mute so you couldn't hear me yawning. Sorry, Jim.
Oh,
Only joking, mate. No, I was eating a plum actually. So, hey,
Just gripping stuff.
yeah, just going back to the MDRSs, I'd consider that a knee-jerk piece of legislation that actually won't serve us well going forward. If it's used in a way that some developers, won't say all developers, but some developers might see opportunities around the use of it. So when exactly does it take effect?
They were required to notify a plan change in August or by August.
That's what I thought you said.
Then it would actually take effect, I guess, once we get the submissions and have the hearing and decisions are made.
But the submissions are, it's a status, it's a, you go through a process, but in actual fact, government's created legislation and basically doesn't give you a chance to change it anyway through the submission process.
To a large degree, I believe that's true. However, if we as a council decide to promote something that is much more restricted than, say, all of Huntley or all of Raglan or whatever, and we really try to use those levers in those qualifying matters, it may be that the whole community says, yep, that's great, protect those parts from intensification. But it may be that there are other parts of the district and the development community that say, no, actually, this is great, and we want the same right to build 3 stories, et cetera, as anyone else in the urban area. So, yeah, I mean, I guess there could be quite a bit to consult on depending on what route you want to take.
Interesting. Anna Maria.
That's a good question, Mayor Allen, because Jim, I'm not sure. I haven't studied the ins and outs of the Act, but I'm sure I've heard in discussions that at time of notification, the provisions, whatever we notify, in order to meet the needs of that new Act, have legal effect, and that's significant, and that's different to how our PDP process, our normal Schedule 1 process flows for new plans and plan changes. So I'm not sure if I'm correct, but I think it's worth looking at that, because if that is the case, at the time that we notify, if that's what we do, that adds another whole layer for consenting processes on top of the already complex layer of the operative provisions plus the PDP. And then we have another set of provisions on top of that. So that, I really liked your last slide of the person with hands and head, because that is really what it will be like for a consenting environment for us with customers. So I guess I'd just like to say I'd like to double check that, because that could be quite significant for us in terms of delivery of service to developers.
I'm seeing some nodding heads, Anna Maria. So I believe that we'll double check that, but I think that is the case. And I was jumping ahead to when the whole thing might be finally operative. But given that there aren't, there's not really the right of appeal. It's I suppose the difference could be between what we notify and then what comes out of the hearing panel, having heard submissions. But in the meantime, you got that complexity of giving immediate effect to something we notify, and then potentially rolling it back or changing it when the hearing panel makes it, or the minister makes their decision. We'll double check that. Thank you.
It's like a steamroll of this thing. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, well, at least we can take some comfort that it must be good legislation, because other than parliamentarians' own superannuation agreements or arrangements, this is one of the few things that got bipartisan support, for what that's worth. My commentary is that I guess we should then very carefully look at those qualifying matters and try to, as much as possible, give weight to those publicly consulted processes that have already produced outcomes for us, the blueprints, Waikato 2070, and the future-proof work in the sub-region. I mean, these are, we already have the view of our people captured from different perspectives in those documents, and let's try as best we can to give weight to those as we shape what will be more restrictive conditions than the law tends to allow. And then let's see how the regulator or the minister responds to that. I guess that would be my couplings with.
Thank you for that comment. I might just add there that we are in a good situation compared to some of the other tier 1 councils in that we have a relatively up-to-date growth strategy as well as blueprints, as well as what's coming through future proof. So as well as a new PDP, whereas there are other councils who are, gosh, qualifying matters. Where are we at with our heritage work? Oh, it's 8-9 years out of date or whatever. So hopefully we're in as good a position as we can to look at those levers.
The thing, when I read this, Jim, and it was something that I thought about when I first saw this, when it came into legislation, is, part of our district plan review, I look at communities like Raglan that have very much pushed back on the concept of multi-storey apartments. But in actual fact, these houses could be prescribed as multi-storey apartments by default and put in places in Raglan where they don't want them. And that's a real downside for a community, because I've seen it happened about a decade or more ago. It started happening up at Whitianga, and a lot of the community pushed back on it. They've sort of slowed down, but they're starting to look at going back there now based off what's allowed up there. But just to come back to us here, I can see these things popping up in the most inappropriate places throughout our communities where there's opportunities, because our older parts of our towns predominantly sit on anything between 800 to 1,000 to 1,100 square metre sections, which could just about allow, if they could find the right ones, to build a minimum of 2 and possibly 3 on one side. So I start to look at all of the downsides of this sort of thing, but there was no thought ever put into the implications of doing this, for us anyway. Cities are probably, metros are sort of a bit different, but for us, it's just not, it's not normal for us, I suppose. It's real left field sort of stuff. So, Maxine.
Yeah.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. So there must be some parts of the community, of the different towns, that have a sort of character about them, a character that you want to retain. And I know that Cambridge isn't in this district, but when I think of Cambridge, I think of, older style, well, some certain styles of houses and lots of trees, and it's a little bit more relaxed. I don't see it as being a town that's got lots of multi-storey buildings on properties and lots of people close together. So in my mind, it's got a certain type of character. So there must be different places within the Waikato district that have a certain sort of character that we want to protect. So I guess it may mean that there will be streets or areas within the different townships that you'd almost like zone to be able to have these multi-storey buildings on. Is that the sort of thinking, or is it? Because that's not what you're talking about, is it, Mayor Allen? You're saying maybe no. Yeah.
They'll just go where the opportunity lies. So they'll look at a piece of land and think, how can we maximise the dollars here? And that's the first thing I thought of when I heard about this. For a developer, especially if you're operating in that lower affordable, what you might call affordable area, this is a real game changer for them. This gives them scope and opportunity to maximise their dollars off a minimum piece of land.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Mayor Allen, I would like character to be a strong consideration in this act. I don't think it is, though, and I think in fact, this legislation is the government's attempt to override what it perceives to be character-based NIMBYism about intensified housing. I'm sitting in an area right now of Hamilton East called Hayes Paddock, which you'll be aware is, it's actually got a heritage designation, which is rare for an entire neighborhood to have one. But Hamilton as a whole will be struggling to apply that, maybe struggling to apply that more broadly, because they don't have heritage listings for most of their neighborhoods. They have single family character neighborhoods, but they're not Their only protection, so to speak, is the zoning. And this legislation is specifically to come in and override the zoning and say, well, that's nice that you think the character of your area is single family housing. So do a lot of neighborhoods. That's not the new character, or that you can't enshrine that in perpetuity. So that's a real challenge, I think, in the Act.
Councillor Lynch.
Thank you, Your Worship. The chair of the Huntly Community Board has already offered 3 parks in Huntly for intensification on housing. And he says that staff have picked 3 parks that council don't need. I'm not sure what the rest of Huntly would think of it. And I don't really know what our sort of culture is in Huntly. Yeah, for intensification of housing. It's just, yeah, I think it's quite frightening, to be honest. But Jim, that's a really good, you've put in a really good presentation today, and I really appreciated reading it.
Thank you.
All right. Has anybody else got any comments? I think it is a good paper, Jim. It sort of outlines it and that. And yeah, it's fair to say, just going to our district plan appeals, I've had a couple already organisations contact me apologising for actually putting in appeals. And I had Fonterra come to me the other day, only because the person that looks after that area of public relations between Fonterra and local government knows me very, very well. We go back a long way, and she rang me to apologise, to say that Fonterra put in an appeal around reverse sensitivity, and they have had some battles over that. And I just said to her, I says, that's what it's there for, so we can actually have a second look and see whether they did get it right or not, sort of thing. So so I'm not worried about the appeals in any way or form. Once the team categorises them, puts them all in their pigeonholes, we'll actually start chipping away at them.
Well, through you, Mayor Allen, I just want to acknowledge that we were all in the wider community growth team trying to scramble to understand the legislation. So Donna and her team, including Fletcher and James, as well as Yvonne and Sandra in the district plan team, in addition to getting the district plan decisions launched, we're trying to get our heads around this. So what I'm hearing is no objections to us exploring the options in full around what we can do to give this a Waikato district flavor.
I think you need to, Jim. Yeah, I'm just not going to, because I'm fearful. I gave you one example in relation to Raglan, as much as the community, through the district plan review, the current operative and this proposed one, which both of them have said all the way through they don't want multi-storey apartments, and yet this actually, in a way, allows multi-storey apartments. It just rode over top of us, whether we like it or not. So and Raglan's probably one of those places you might say does have character features. Whether they will stand up or not is probably, I don't know, to be honest, unless you test the water. But our other communities like Ngaruahi, Huntly, and everywhere else probably can't.
Well, Mayor Allen, I think now James Fuller is going to give us a brief recap or a update as to where we're up to with the RM reform project generally, where they seem to be taking a little bit more time than with this act, I suppose.
Right, floor's yours, James.
Kia ora, Mayor, councillors, and Mrs. Moana Tufangi. I'm just conscious of time, and I've got a presentation, so I'll just share my screen on that. And hopefully this will work. There we go. Can you all see that now?
Can do, James. Yes.
Yep. So yeah, as I've sort of communicated to you, we've had another discussion document that's come out from MFE, which sort of talks more about the Natural Built Environment Act and Strategic Planning Act, which is sort of proposed to change the Resource Management Act. I think probably for me, it still lacks quite a bit of detail. I mean, we made a submission to the select committee, and and a number of others did, and a lot of them asked questions, and it's almost like we've had those questions sort of come back to us in a boomerang fashion. So, yeah, this discussion document's sort of gone under the radar a little bit, and it's not going to select committee. So I think it's really just to help MFE with their decision making, from what I can see. So a number of councils have made submissions, and including Waikato Regional Council, and most of those councils have attempted to answer all the questions, which there's quite a few. So yeah, I mean, the background relates to the Randerson report, which I've sort of brought to you before, and that's been kind of modified by the select committee. So yeah, probably some of the key points. There's questions around discussion around the national planning framework, regional spatial strategies, and the natural built environment plans, which are kind of the regional plans which will suck up regional plans and district plans into one. So sort of reducing 70 or 80 plans around the country into 14. And then there's talk of the Board of Inquiry process to sort of ratify some of those regional type plans, and the makeup of committees, more Maori and local input, and how that's sort of configured. So this is just a bit of a recap. You've seen this before, and the structure of the discussion document, as I mentioned, part one was about context and the reforms to date. Part two is sort of where the government is at. So yeah, given it's due out at the end of the year, you would have thought they're a bit behind, but yeah, they're still sort of designing this future system and asking questions. And the reason for it, to date, the natural environment's not been protected well. Local government plans are restricting housing and infrastructure growth. And we've got a population increasing, so it does sort of tie back to this Housing Enablement Act that they've also brought out, and that's quite a lot of legislation thrown at local government, and they want the system to recognise hapu, iwi and Maori relations under the Treaty of Waitangi, reduction in carbon emissions and adaptation to climate change. But yeah, what they are saying is there's a lack of integration across the system, and inefficiencies and delays and costs. So yeah, quite a lot going on there. So you've also sort of seen this slide. It's how it may all fit together, so I won't spend too much time on that. Yeah, but really what they're wanting around the environmental outcomes is maybe setting environmental bottom lines, so natural resources, water, air, soils and natural habitats, and then setting targets to achieve that in the natural and the built environments. So yeah, I've talked about the acts, and the future one to come is sort of the Climate Change Adaptation Act. But we should see the NBA and SPA introduced into Parliament, saying third quarter, so potentially around September. So this is just a quick slide of how the system would work. So I suppose key for us is the natural built and environment plans, so sort of those regional plans that suck up district kind of rules and objectives and policies, and how that might be guided by the regional spatial strategies. So yeah, just the Strategic Planning Act. So some key things as that feeds down into the regional spatial strategy, identifying areas for suitable development. I mean, we're pretty good in that space, and that we've got a growth strategy which has sort of done that. Areas that need protection, requirements for infrastructure. So that could be, you know, some big ticket items like wind farms if we're going to more sustainable energy and things like that, and identifying areas that are vulnerable to climate change effects and natural hazards, which we've also done as our sort of stage 2 of our PDP process. So, and some of the things that were sort of picked up in the select committee are linking it to the other legislative documents like the Local Government Act, which is also under review, so more change, Land Transport Management Act, and the Climate Change Response Act, which is being updated. So yeah, and as mentioned, the Natural and Built Environment Act, its outcomes faced, it still retains the avoid, remedy and mitigate adverse effects, and it doesn't want to place unreasonable costs on development and resource use, and a stronger reflection of Te Aringa o Te Taio, so the intergenerational importance of health and well-being of the natural environment. So, other matters, I suppose the NPF, or National Planning Framework, providing clear direction. So where we get that sort of tension between, say, an NPS on urban development and an NPS on Indigenous biodiversity or high quality soils, hopefully that framework will sort of, you know, work that out. And as I mentioned, one plan for each region. The interesting bit will be how those are sort of developed. So prepared by a joint committee comprising of representatives from Maori local government, and at this stage they're saying a representative from the Minister of Conservation, but as with the Waikato, we've got 11 district councils and a regional council that's quite keen to be involved pretty heavily in that process. So decisions on plans will be undertaken by an independent hearings panel, and that's sort of a board of inquiry, similar to how the Auckland Unitary Plan was put together. So as Jim was saying, for the Housing Enabling Act, you know, it would be notified, people could make submissions, but actually the independent board would make those decisions. It does go back to that joint committee for sort of ratification, but yeah, there's not necessarily a lot of public and community input or ability to change. In terms of consenting, the activity classes and notification rules to be standardised, and what we'll see potentially is more permitted activities. They're doing away with non-compliant activities, and then compliance and monitoring and enforcement could be more regionalised or with some national links. So yeah, I've kind of couple of slides here on the key questions that were in the document, which I've sort of touched on. I suppose the key for us would be the regional spatial strategies and the subcommittees, and who sort of represents, you know, the district, and the makeup of those committees. And they're also asking, will this plan making process be more efficient and effective and to deliver planning outcomes? So I suppose with our submission in the past and a lot of the others from the Future Proof partners, we've tried to come up with concrete kind of examples of how the new system can work. So yeah, and probably one of the submission points that the Regional Council has put in and they've highlighted here is the potential to enable some sub-regional plans in the NBE natural built environment plans. So that potentially is good for us, and that, you know, we might get a more of a look in the sort of the regionalised plans. You might actually go down to a sub-regional level and include the likes of Hamilton City, Waikato District and Waipa, because we've already sort of done that process. So, and as I said, more examples. So, who is representing the TA interests? And there is talk of, you might combine the representative for a few different district councils depending on the region. But yeah, still lacking detail. Not sure about the consenting changes. For example, the majority of consents are non-notified. I've heard recently through the Infrastructure Commission that council costs have remained relatively static, and where the costs have gone up is with consultants. So, right, sort of next steps. So, yeah, submissions due into the discussion document today. But yeah, as I said, it's fairly below the radar, and the next step isn't back to the select committee. We've got to wait for the full documents to come through, as I said, in the third quarter. But happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, James. Yeah, if you want to take your screen down, all I would say is I don't see any of this actually making it any easier or faster than it currently is, and I think that's what one of the outcomes that they were looking for. I may be wrong, but I don't feel that it will be. I think it'll be just as complicated and as difficult for anybody in the future, based on what I've seen now as it is now. The only thing is in relation to sub-regional plans, because one of the comments I've made to some of my fellow mayors, especially in the Future Proof Partnership, the work we're doing, and you look at the classic, is around the Waikato Metro Plan, and the other work up through the river communities all the way to the north. In actual fact, that's the level of detail that you just about need to actually give some certainty around what needs to happen for your district or your communities. So I think we're well in advance of everybody else in the greater Waikato, if not in the country, to be honest. So, but how do we make sure that that work and what we've done there as three major councils, which represent probably somewhere between 75 to 80% of the population in the Waikato, is actually given the credence it deserves?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, Mayor Allen. I think the key is to make submissions. I know MFE have been looking at it, and they have engaged, and I think a number of us and a number of our partners have put forward that. And I suppose the key thing out of this discussion document is they do make note of the sub-regional question. So I think that's in direct links to to the work that us and our other partners have done to sort of get that on their radar. So through the select committee process and stuff. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
I think given the right opportunity, we need to, three councils, I'm talking about the partners, need to really push that. And the fact that we are way ahead of most other parts of New Zealand, and ministers have told me that in the past that we're way ahead of others. So let's not lose that gain and that hard work that's gone into getting us to where we are around identifying where growth should be happening. Councillor Sedgwick.
Look, you kind of covered off a little bit of what I was going to say. So there's a balance between a generic move towards bigger is better, amalgamation is better, larger is better, and then the counterbalance of that being but local. Who's looking after the local? So I really picked up, James, when you started talking about the sub-regional plans, but I think also that's going to add to the workload of requiring very, very definitive plans and very prescriptive plans, and also making sure that staff in particular are watching out for any little nuances. So I don't envy the workload that may well arise from that, but I can see where it's trying to go. But thank you for that point.
All right, thanks, Councillor. Has anyone else got any questions? Councillor Beck?
Just a comment. I wonder whether I wonder whether Anna Maria should put up that, or Donna should put up that scratching head last slide again, because it's just one thing on top of another, isn't it? I mean, the pace at which these things are coming at us and are all adding complexity when simplicity was the desired outcome. It's quite troubling.
Well, that's why I made the comment. I just think it's like layer cake. It's just growing on top of one another. Jim.
Yeah, I've taken this slideshow away, but I'll scratch my head for you. But I was going to say that just looking into that immediate legal effect point that Anna Maria raised, yeah, it is the case that the new density provisions will have immediate legal effect, except for areas that we propose to be in qualifying matter areas. So, for example, if we say we don't want it to apply to this part of this town for this reason, the law doesn't say it's going to apply anyway until we work through that. It does buy us a stay of execution, if you will, or however you want to put it, for while we work through that process. And similarly, there seems to be something about if we're proposing standards that are different around setbacks, et cetera, if they're different than what's in the legislation, then we can rely on our operative district plan standards in the meantime while we work through whether the government standards or our proposed ones are best. So there's a couple little but important technical / legal avenues around that within the context of the general immediate effect.
I would suggest, Jim, that the minister who's in charge of this is arrogant enough to think that he's always right and it'll be his way or the highway. So I think any chance of getting him to sway is probably pretty slim, to be honest. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, I do welcome, though, the opportunity we have to work through qualifying matters, Jim. And I dare say, with all the legislation we're looking at, that could take quite some time. Please not.
Yeah.
Years, perhaps.
Yeah. You pollute his innocent mind. Maxine.
I just want to say, it's quite noticeable the amount of emphasis on relationships with Māori in the proposed new legislation. But when I think about Waikato district and this local area, I think that this whole Waikato region has moved along that path a lot quicker than a lot of other areas. You've got the Te Whaimana when there was the river settlement and the impact that it immediately had on the councils in this area because of the river. You got the JMAs, which councils work with. You've got the River Committee, which is a joint chaired arrangement which councils work with. You've got the Waikato River Trust, which councils work with. You've got Māngai Māori, which councils work with. So in a lot of ways, I think that this council is a long way along the track to, and the council's voted to have Māori seats on the incoming council. So council's a long way, this council's a long way along that track. I think probably further along than other councils who didn't have the river settlement, that didn't have JMAs already, that didn't have Māori seats already, that don't have Māngai Māori already. And I think council needs to just pause sometimes and pat yourselves on the back just to say, you guys are doing really well. You're doing really, really well. And well done, just well done.
Thank you, Maxine. That is appreciated. Sometimes I don't think anybody recognises what we've actually done. Dare we say we have a tendency to do it and just move on and don't look back. And I think that's always been my style. Never look behind you, just keep going forward. Anyone else? Any comments? Nothing before we go and have a coffee, everybody? Okay, thanks very much, team. Have appreciated it. It just really scares me around the speed of some of the stuff that change that's been thrust at us at the moment. A whole raft of things from central government. It's almost as if they have got the throttle and they just got it hard down and they're keeping their foot on it, and we just have to try and live with it, but it makes it really, really difficult But yeah, look, thanks to everybody that's presented today. Thanks to the councillors, and I will catch you all in the morning.